Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I am again your host, Shawn Merwin, here with my invaluable partner, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Once
Thank you
again,
for
back is
filling
the
in
incredible
last week.
you know what I just noticed? I still have the Celeste
What's
Crown
that?
Witch overlay on you. So you are currently, but wait,
I'll be
you're back.
Celeste.
You are Shawn Merwin once more.
Oh, I wish I could be Celeste. But you
Yeah,
can't always get what you want.
no,
By the way, thank you to Celeste for filling in on short notice last week. We really do appreciate you doing that and appreciate all the work that you're doing. So thank you. And thank you, Teos, for dealing with my whatever that was that happened last week.
yeah, no. I mean, as I said, tech issues were only some of the issues, but
Yeah.
but yeah, happy post Father's Day. I hope it was good for you. It was good for me. My family, my wife made French toast, which is for special occasions. We don't know why, but it is, and it's
Ooh.
great. Love it.
I got chicken enchiladas, which is my favorite meal that my wife makes. So I feel quite honored.
I for
My wife
dinner
and my daughter.
had chicken enchiladas. I kid
Yeah.
you not.
That see, it's a chicken enchilada day here at Mastering Dungeons.
Tell you Father's Day.
And it's also Origins Week. Yeah, it's also
Mm.
Origins Week. I will be attending. And of course, being a creator of D&D content, I will be running Star Trek Adventures while I'm there. So I'm looking forward
Nice,
to that. It's been a while since I dug into that game. So we'll see how it goes.
nice. That's fun.
Yeah. But we have a ton of listener email, listener comments, listener questions, which we will get to right now in our listener corner. First, we have Grandpa's advice via Twitter. Is there an easy way to run an interesting campaign? I have a copy of The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but don't know where to start. I also have memory problems, so know that reading the whole thing a year ahead will be a lot of time and effort with very little value.
Mm.
So, what do you think, Teos?
Ooh, yeah. I think that it depends on what you want out of your campaign, how you want to prep for it, and you sort of have to develop your own style of what will lead you to running a
Mhm.
good game. There are some DMs that can glance at a page, put it away, and go for 4 hours, and it's a great session, and everybody's cheering. And then for some folks, doing that is a disaster. Um, and then some folks just like to prep. Like I can sometimes do that, but I just like prepping. Like prepping makes me feel good, puts me
Mhm.
in a happy place for the gaming session. So I probably over prep, but that's part of what makes the run enjoyable for me is having had that early prep. I feel good about it. Um, so the more that you want to follow the word of the adventure closely, then I think the more that prep pays off to really understand what that written word is saying, but you don't need that. And especially if you're not going to remember a lot of it, then don't waste the time on it, right? Try different approaches, like
Mhm.
maybe read the section that you're going to have come up. So that intro section to get started, and then make some bullet points and riff off of that, right? Is a perfectly acceptable way to approach it, especially if you're not going to remember those little details. Make them up, right? Um, but my approach is I read the whole adventure, then I read the section I'm about to run. I make a bullet point outline on paper. I print out the monsters because that's something I want to have to be able to write on and whatever. And then I have the adventure open, but my outline is the main thing I work off of.
Yeah, I mean, the easy way to run an interesting campaign depends on what you find interesting and what your players find interesting. But if you talk about that in terms of using a published adventure, I am in a very similar boat to Grandpa's advice. I tend to not run regularly. Maybe if we can get two or even one session in a month, I'm lucky. So if I'm running a published adventure, I will have forgotten everything that has been read ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to focus very much on what am I doing today? What am I doing right now? One thing that you can do if you have trouble prepping is not to prep at all, including not using a published adventure. That's where the tables that we've been talking about can come in extremely handy. You can sit down and roll up the adventure on the fly. That way, you don't need to worry about prepping. And also, everybody has different issues with memory and how they best remember things. But for some people, it's I can't remember something I've read, but I can remember something I've created. So
Mhm.
if you're creating the adventure on the fly, oh, they're going into a dungeon, and later in the show we are going to make a dungeon on the fly. They're going into a dungeon. I'm going to do this randomly. Boom. Here's the first thing. What's in here? Boom. It's two trolls. Okay. Two trolls. What are the trolls doing? And as you make the adventure, if they're guarding a prisoner, that prisoner that you make will now be more in your memory than this person that you read about in a book 6 months ago. Now that person becomes important, and you can decide why they're important.
Yeah.
You can make the story, or let the players make the story, and that can be an interesting way to run a campaign. For prep tips, obviously you have Mike Shea, Sly
Mhm.
Flourish, who talks all about prepping. There are a series of books from Engine Publishing about gameplay, prepping, running things at the table, making NPCs, and so on, that are really, really valuable to have if you have trouble prepping, or if you need help, or if you need advice on prepping. So I would suggest those as well.
Yeah, and something like I like a hybrid approach between yours, suggesting of like something like Wild Beyond the Witchlight. You could look at it and sort of go like, okay, what are the main things? Right, like we start in the carnival, then we go to this, then we go to that,
Mhm.
and you can use that to help you create the structure. But then you add those pieces that are really yours. So, what are the carnival events? Whatever you want them to be, versus trying to make their events and run them their way. That can be the part where the memory hits the right, like it goes off the rails, and you feel bad
Mhm.
because you're not doing whatever the book said, but the book is just whatever someone came up with. It's not perfect. I mean, Will is an amazing writer, and so is everybody else who was on the team. But
Right.
you just you can whatever you do for your group will probably be good. And one of the most insulting events I had in my life, self-inflictedly insulting, was when I was very young. I think I was probably a freshman in college, youngish. I ran a game and I made like I didn't have anything prepped, and like who cares, just make it up. And I'm like okay, and I made it up, and they were like that was the best thing ever. And that
Mhm.
was so insulting to me because it meant that every time that I'd either homebrewed or run a campaign was not as good as this stupid thing I just made up, that I didn't even like that much.
Mhm.
But I
Right.
did learn from that. As much as it hurts, it still hurts my feelings, honestly, like it still does. But it's that idea that
Mhm.
sometimes working off the moment really is better, right? And yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to try it. Try it one session. Try to just work from an index card worth of notes and make the rest up as you go and see how it feels. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't work, you can always go back and try something else. But if it does work, or if it works to a limited extent, you know what works and what doesn't, and you can take what works and
Mhm.
incorporate it into your prep or into your gameplay. If you're really great at making NPCs up on the fly, then make them up on the fly. If you're really great at putting encounters together on the fly, then forget what's in the book and put those encounters together on the fly going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next we have a question from Cistern via Twitter. For years, I've read about the swinginess of D20 based TTRPG systems and how they can lead to player dissatisfaction, especially at
Mm.
low levels. How could one address this concern without completely throwing out what many enjoy about D20 systems in general?
Yeah.
Teos.
Yeah, I think the big impact that you usually talk about with the swinginess is when everyone feels that someone should succeed, but then they roll low, right? So like you give an amazing in character speech and you're the diplomat of the party, you're an expert, you've got plus whatever to your roll, and you roll that one. And because the spread of the d20 between 1 and 20 is so huge, there is always that possibility of failure, or almost always in most editions of D&D. So you fail despite everything saying you should succeed and everybody feeling like the narrative is heading towards success. So as a DM, we can, raise the importance of what players are saying and doing. Like maybe we don't need a roll, or we get advantage. So you rolled a one, but are you going to roll a one twice? Like hopefully not. The other thing you can do is lean into the failure in a fun way, so that if you fail, you say, okay, everything came out right. Somehow this didn't work, and let's, on the fly make up why did that happen, right? Like, you're talking the guards into letting you in, but they specifically seem to not let you in. Make me an insight check, even though everything you said was perfect. Oh, you think they've been paid off to, prevent your entrance. Like, they were expecting this. No words were going to work, no matter how good, or something like that, right? That furthers the narrative and explains the failure in some way. What do you think, Shawn?
Mhm. Yeah, what Teos said, plus. The first thing is swinginess. The definition for swinginess for me is a little different. What swinginess means for me is, with the same rules and the same check, an unarmored commoner with a club could defeat an armored, highly trained fighter with a great sword, just because the die rolls come out that way. And you can think of it the same way as the 18 strength barbarian is trying to lift the gate, and the 8 strength wizard is trying to lift the gate. And the chances of the barbarian failing but the wizard succeeding is it's higher than you would think it should be story-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Story-wise, you have Conan versus Raistlin,
Mm-hmm.
and Conan should win every time in the lifting of the gates thing. But that D20 can be so random that a higher percentage of the time Raistlin might succeed where
Yeah.
Conan fails. So that's swinginess to me. And so what you can do to prevent certain types of swinginess is don't call for die rolls when there's no consequences to failure. uh if there's no consequence, oh, you can't lift the gate, but you're going to try again 25 more times, or you're going to be able to break it down anyway, so just say you lift the gate. If there's no consequence, story wise or otherwise, to failure, just say you did it. What other games do is they give built-in mechanics that lets you pretty much auto succeed if it's important enough that you need to. So for fate, you could use those fate
Aspect.
points
Mm-hmm.
to re-roll a terrible roll, tap the aspects to get, and you could stack fate points from other people. So that pretty much you can auto succeed. There will be a cost later,
Mm-hmm.
but you can do that. So D&D tries to have those rules. They understand the value of those rules, but it's never been a part of the game. So they're like, okay, here's inspiration. Inspiration is supposed to give you a way to sort of hedge your bets, and you will more likely than not succeed if you use your inspiration here. But it's still not strong enough, either mechanically or narratively, to capture the imagination or of the storytellers, or capture the mechanical benefits of the number crunchers.
Yeah.
So D&D hasn't embraced that yet. But there is a rule that allows that to happen. That's called Rule 0. Right. That says, for the fun of the table, ignore the rules and do what needs to happen. So Rule 0 can overcome swinginess, but people are hesitant to do that because the rules are so ingrained in us that, well, a failure on the die is a failure on the die. Deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's been reinforced over the editions and over the years and through our storytelling, uh our games. So it's going to be a hurdle for the game to overcome until we acknowledge the fact that swinginess, it can be fun at times, but it can be bad for the game. And until we say, okay, we're going to put in a rule to overcome that, it's always going to be there.
Yeah, that makes me think of that, that previous example of, like, you're making a roll and you get that one, and how do you explain it? And one of the ways to do it is to say that, no, you did succeed, but something else happens, right? Like, you sway the king with
Mhm.
your great words, but you can tell that there are a couple people who really don't like what you said, right? So there's some complication, some cost, some other piece that gets you past the fact that it should be a failure. Something else happened there, and then
Mhm.
you could work with that as well. It's another angle. But a lot of it is that D&D, it can be a feature, right? Like, D&D is the swinginess is part of the play and part of the story that we look for. And you can see, like in the D&D movie, right, where there's a scene at a bridge and one guy's explaining exactly how the trap works and the other one sets it off. And that's that kind of humor
Mhm.
that D&D
Right.
sometimes have, where you can't take it for granted that you'll succeed. Whereas on the opposite side, like I think of Night's Black Agents, and Night's Black Agents is really replicating those action movies where, in Mission Impossible, when you need to shoot that one chain link to like break the platform apart, you can't. And how do you do it? Well, you buy points, right? You
Mhm.
spend points because you just know that you're going to hit. You know you're going to succeed because it's what you do, and the game enables that. D&D doesn't
Mhm.
try to enable that kind of a feel, right?
Yeah, totally.
Hmm.
Next, we have a question from Marcelo, the Valiant, via Twitter. Hi, Marcelo. Good to hear from you. Do you wonder why some systems have many different or few dice? Is there something beyond just them being a determiner of success, plot drivers, etc.? This is this is a really interesting question to me, and it's you can take it on many different levels. But I will
Mhm.
let Teos go first.
I think some of it is that there's the economy of the entire game is based off of what you roll. And so as you're building a game, it matters what happens, right? If you're rolling a single D6 like in Knights Black Agents, then that makes it a really narrow area to plan around, right? Like your target number can't be 24 unless you've got something really unusual going on with the D6, a way that it explodes or something like that, or huge bonuses, right? And so the simpler the game, the easier it is to work off of a smaller 2d6, d6, something like that. Um, but then you get into something like third edition, right, where your DC, like I once succeeded at a tracking check of 50 that was written into an adventure. Though to be honest, the person that put in the adventure for me. Uh, but it was in a Flaming Greyhawk organized play campaign, but still a DC of 50, right, off of a D20, because that's how wild the bonuses were with all that swinginess, and that enables crunch, right, to have that D20 plus all of these different pieces hanging off of it. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think when you're building it, you're trying to the RPG, you're trying to think of what you want that to work like. Um, Dice are probabilities, which feels different too, right? So that's why the great axe is D12, because it's the idea that it can do this huge hit, but also just a glancing blow or a tiny cut because you just dodge it. And so it
Mhm.
feels like the kind of thing that should sometimes be big, sometimes be small, versus always being reliable, right? The dagger's always a D4, so it's just doing but so much. Um, and games do that too, right? Fate uses the D6 but has only 3 outcomes. The dice and fantasy flight games have a 4 permutations. So these symbols or numbers give you just a few combinations that you can play with and make it reliable. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
you're trying to recreate a certain feel, a certain probability range, and then build off of that. What do you think,
Mhm.
Shawn?
Yeah, it's both. It's probability and it's feel. It's how do you want to get from the narrative that you're starting with to the narrative that you're ending with, and what goes on in between the end of I try to do this and the start of here's the result. And so if you want it simple, if you want it quick, you want a die, or not even a die, but a
Mhm.
playing card, a coin
Mm,
toss, a rock, paper, scissors throw
yeah.
that is quick, easy, or that's complicated and convoluted. And so that's why, and sometimes the dice, just the dice themselves are beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Those Fantasy Flight Star Wars dice, you see them and you just want to use them.
Mm,
You want to roll them to see these different symbols come up. And now these different symbols translate into something that could be done numerically,
yeah.
but they choose not to because they want you to not just look at the numbers, but look at the story as a whole. Whereas D&D often wants you to look at the numbers, and you can look at the story as a whole if you choose to, but you don't need to, because all you're doing is subtracting hit points from a creature, and you don't need to know the ins and outs of every single blow. You just need to know, did I do 2 points of damage? Did I do 20 points of damage? And
Yeah.
that's what the dice want you to do.
Another fun example is the poker deck that's used in the Deadlands role playing game. right? It's just a perfect fit where it
Mhm.
could be a die, it could be a table, but having it be based off of pulling a card from a deck of cards, it just feels in world, right? It's such a great call to do that. And not all
Mhm.
editions of it have done it, I think. And when they don't, there's been sort of protests because it's like, come on, like this is just such a perfect fit.
Uh-huh. Yep. But if you're going to buy all these dice, people make money off selling dice. So they also there's that part of it too. We want to make a few extra euros by selling you a die or 20.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question. Next, we have Ryan Service via Twitter. We always talk about ways to be a better DM, but what are some techniques to shine as a player? What are the kind of things DMs love to see and are great for the table?
So add a character, just I mean it's in character too, but caring about the setting, caring about the adventure and the stakes of it are huge, right? That makes the DM so happy when you care. They tell you something and you feed off of it and work off of it. That involvement reflects an agency that your character should have, that they desire that you have, right? Join a faction, champion the cause, form friendships with NPCs, ask to do this thing based off of whatever happened in the scene. That kind of thing really works really well.
Mhm. I've got two answers. The first is a sort of game mechanical thing, and it's understand what your character can do. Know the limits of what it can do, and don't try to do more than you're supposed to. But be able to, if the DM says, "All right, you're using that spell. What does that spell do?" Know what the spell does, and if you want to push it beyond that, then have a conversation with the DM. But if everybody has to stop and the DM has to go look up the thing that your character is supposed to do, it can really slow the game down. Now, obviously, if you're a new player, if you're teaching, that's a whole different story. But in general, know what you're and don't make the DM have to say, I don't think that spell can do that and go to the book and say, you're trying to do something here. And it specifically says in the spell that you can't do that, but you're trying to do that. And I'm talking about one of my players specifically here, if in case you missed it. But that the second thing is to be the best wing person that you can be, right? Set up other people to do their thing and to tell their stories, especially help the DM do their thing and tell their stories. Without uh Bud Abbott, right? Abbott had Costello, or is
Hmm.
it vice versa? Uh, right. The Marx brothers, Harpo and Groucho and Chico couldn't do their thing without Zeppo. You need the person who is the norm
Mm.
for that other people can play off of. And so
Yeah.
everyone should get a shot of doing that at the table. So be the setup person, let the other people
Yeah.
tell their funny story, do their funny thing, whether it's story wise or mechanically. Be that person.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. It is really interesting how those kinds of players, it makes such a huge difference. Like it really is. And I think it's just be observant of what your role does at the table, how you behave, what your character does. Because those dynamics are really worth seeing. And like I think of a campaign where the use of summoning spells in fifth edition where hordes of creatures suddenly plop onto the table, clogging the entire movement of both enemies and
Mhm.
PCs. And bags of hit points that sort of can't be defeated, but don't add a whole lot. And it's like, yes, it does help you win, but it's not great play. And I think if you watch it, like I remember when I first
Mhm.
did one of these spells, and I was like, this isn't really good for the combat. Just being aware of that. Well, this is
Yeah.
tactically great, but I'm just gonna not cast this. It clogs it up.
Mhm. Yep. So thank you for that question, Ryan. We have Bearded Goblin via Mastodon who asks, what is your favorite non-standard TTRPG? Non-standard being not the 6 attributes with armor class, hit points, classic classes, etc. What's your call there, Teos?
I think Shadow of the Demon Lord's too close to that, so I can't say that one. So the gumshoe system, I think,
Mhm.
just because it's so good at doing what it's trying to do, it knows exactly what its goal is, and everything about the game is really achieving that in a flexible enough way to do a lot of genres, which is cool. What about you?
Uh, my answer will change based on the day you ask me, but right now I'm going to say Fate because it's very flexible and it sort of carries. There's an old saying that like character is fate or character is destiny. And that really gets to the point of role playing games for me, which is not just what you do, but who you are as the character should be important in both the story and the game. And Fate brings that through about as well as any game that I can imagine. But I'm running Star Trek Adventures at Origins in like 4 days. So yeah, maybe it'll be the 2D20 system once I actually get into that again and play with it a little more. Okay, and our final question, Eternal Apprentice via Mastodon. How do I sell raiding mechanics to a group of gamers that are squeamish about killing captive monsters or other such workplace atrocities that traditional gaming culture makes necessary? And I think this refers to one of the mechanics that we did at Ghostfire Gaming for the Raider's Guide to Valaka Kickstarter and book. And so there's a couple things here. These raiding mechanics work also for defending from raiders as well as being the raiders. So you can always use them as the defenders. And raiding, as we describe it, does not necessarily mean killing. In fact, we may go out of our way to say that these raiders are going after resources. And one of the worst things that you can do if you need resources is to kill the people that create the resources that you're going to need again next year. So that's part of it. The other part is you can use these rating rules to storm a fortress of monsters. You can attack a giant village or an ogre village, or you can use these mechanics to do a lot of different things. And it's more about the strategy of raiding and understanding the resources that you're trying to capture rather than just kill everything in sight. So that's one way that I would sell these rating mechanics that are in that book. Okay, so thank you to everyone for communicating with us through those variety of ways. We do have a little bit of news to get through, so let's jump in with the Gamehole Con releasing its event list. The October convention that Teos and I will be at is, of course, in Madison, Wisconsin. And what are you doing there, Teos?
Some things that I'm really excited about. So I am running, along with you, a Mastering Dungeons live recording. That is super fun.
Always fun.
I'm running a couple
Mhm.
sessions of the Clockwork Tower. My son and I have been diving back into that project. And then I've got two seminars: narrative design in tabletop games and breaking into tabletop design. And so you've got a bunch of really cool events too.
Awesome. Yeah, I've got that same Mastering Dungeons live show. We also are doing I think there's a seminar I'm doing with Joe Rosso of Ghostfire Gaming on creating products, but I'll have to double check that one. Uh, I am running two slots of a game called We All Fall Down. It's a 5e game set in our Aurora world. I'm doing three seminars. Oh, that's the one I'm doing with Joe Rosso.
Mhm.
One world, many games, one game, many worlds, talking about making different games for a world or making different worlds for a game. Then I have seminars on creating tabletop role-playing game system design and world building for tabletop role-playing games. And you can see all of that at the gameholecon.com events list. So tell me about what happened with Reddit, because I was a little out of the loop last week.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the let's call it encrapification process, Reddit has seemed to
Uh-huh.
jump onto this bandwagon that we've seen Twitter and other, Facebook, other spaces get hit, where Reddit announced changes to how APIs allow moderation and reading the site by third parties, as well as some other changes that they were coming up with that are all based on the idea of going public, which is a goal that they've had a while back to go public, have shares, increase revenue, buy horse ranches, whatever it is that folks owning companies think is cool. And Reddit is a common platform for discussion with gaming. People follow subreddits that focus in on topics. And the way that all these things work is the admins are volunteering for their time, often using these third party tools to be able to administer and run these areas. So the change hurts this. And in response, about 7,600 subreddits went dark, turning themselves to private to protest the changes. Reddit has not backed down. They've, in fact, made comments like how Elon Musk is doing so well with Twitter, and they are sure that this is the strategy they should go on. And so they are, in fact, threatening to replace admins. And it's been said that they've reached out to some admins already saying, go back to being public, or else that they'll be replaced. And there are a number of funny things. There's a subreddit for pictures, which apparently has voted to only allow, while this is all going on, only allow pictures of John Oliver where John Oliver looks sexy. There are a couple of different variations of this, but it's the latest example of gaming communities where a major area for gamers to congregate, the platform changes for the worst in this kind of hope to explode revenue wise. So we'll have to see where this goes from here. And if at some point, humanity stands up against this in some way.
Yeah, so basically the only option I have left is to walk outside and just scream my news and opinions into the wilderness. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I mean, there are still a couple of places that seem to operate. You can go hang out at Ian World and a few other small forums. But yeah, I mean, Discord's doing problematic things. It's hard to find a place that isn't kind of doing things that isn't small and independent, right? And so I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, while we're on this topic of sort of legal business related things, Renegade Game Studios issued a cease and desist on a very small Kickstarter. So what happened here? Well, Renegade Game Studios, they make many licensed role-playing games, especially from Hasbro, like Transformers, G.I. Joe. They also work on Power Rangers, as well as Alice is Missing, Kids on Bikes, an addition of Vampire the Masquerade. So Renegade Game Studios went to a small Kickstarter and told it to change its name. This Kickstarter was being called Renegade City, a modern day tabletop role-playing game where you get to play anti-heroes who are criminals. This company that did this is called Polyhedral Dice, or Polyhedral Knights. So Renegade Games issued the cease and desist, saying that the name creates confusion with their game studio. The quote was, "Unfortunately, your use of the term renegade in the title of your new game creates the likelihood that consumers might be confused between our client's games and your game," client being the lawyers of Renegade Game Studios, "or believe that the two are connected or affiliated. The likelihood of confusion is particularly acute because you are using the renegade element on the identical types of products that are sold by Renegade, and you are both selling this to the same types of consumers in the same market channels." So this Kickstarter is over now, and they said that their goal of $3,000 is hardly enough to cover legal costs. So it is unclear at this point, or at least as of this recording, what the company will do. The only now we you would say here, really. Really? So if I make a game called Wizards Unite, Wizards of the Coast would then have a right to come and say you can't use the name Wizards? That seems a little bit beyond the pale. Now, I'm sure legally that this is something that they feel it's smart to do just because, but within the last hour or so, we had a little bit of an addendum to this. Teos, do you want to give your opinion and talk about this
I think
added thing?
everybody's trying to figure out like what is the thing that's the infringement other than the name. And the only thing that people can find is that the imagery and of course the type of game it is plays off a bit, in fact, off of Grand Theft Auto, but there's no relationship between Grand Theft Auto and Renegade Games. It's sort of funny to be like, why is Renegade suing? If anything, it would be the company that makes Grand Theft Auto, which is totally different. It's really hard to understand where the suit is coming from. There have been some people saying that they've had suits from Well, one news site I saw was talking about how Renegade Games had come after them in the past for something. They clearly didn't want to really get into the details. Um, and it had sort of gone away. And someone else was saying that they'd had a situation like this, and what they had done is basically said, "Please confirm." They responded to the law firm saying, "Please confirm that you believe this is an issue and explain more." And they never wrote back. So it may be that there's sort
Mhm.
of, this is just a sort of shot across the bow, an attempt to get them to just change for change's sake, and that they wouldn't actually go to court. They wouldn't press it further. It's hard to say, especially maybe with the negative press, but it does not put Renegade Game Studios in a good light to have handled it in this manner. And I don't think everything I've seen has said that Renegade Game Studios did not respond to any news organization,
Mhm.
news organization um, seeking a response.
Right.
But it people are talking about it doesn't make them look good, and at least so far, none of us can figure
Yeah.
out why this would happen. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it's even more interesting because Renegade's connection to Hasbro's licensed properties has put it should put it obviously mentally in a connection to Hasbro.
Mm.
And all the anti-Hasbro rhetoric and vitriol out there has not washed off on Renegade Game Studios. They have been able to
True.
people generally, if you talk about Renegade Game Studios, you know the people that work there or you know their games, and you're like, okay, cool. They're good folks, make a good
Right.
game.
Good designers.
And
Hmm.
they've been able to separate themselves from Hasbro in a way that Wizards of the Coast hasn't, for obvious reasons, because they're owned by them. But you've never seen the two sort of used in connection, and this just brings them into the light now and
Mm.
reinforces the fact that, oh yeah, they license these things from Hasbro. Boo Hasbro, boo Renegade Game Studios. Look at, you're just like Hasbro, which is not something, if you were a leader at this game studio, that you're going to want.
No.
So it just seemed odd, but
Yeah,
what
very
are you
odd.
going to do?
And if anything, I think what Renegade Game Studios has trouble with is their own self identity, because they do a lot of that licensing, right? I think Alice is Missing is
Mhm.
from Hunter's Entertainment, right? Like, but
Yep.
licensed to them, and Kids on Bikes as well. I think it's a so.
Mhm.
If anything, I'm always confused about exactly what they have done versus someone else has done, and it feels like they're sort of selling it. And that's where I wouldn't worry about some little game. I'd solidify your image and who you are and what you do, and communicate that better. This all just seems
Yeah.
like a bad approach for this studio. Hopefully, they change that up.
Yep. Yeah. We'll see if there anything else comes from this or if it just sort of fizzles out.
Hey, everybody. This is Teos with an unusual update. Just happened to notice right after we recorded that apparently this issue with Renegade Games has been resolved. The lawyers who perhaps acted without Renegade Games actually knowing it, sometimes lawyers can do that. There was a conversation between the Polyhedral Knights Kickstarter creator and these lawyers, and kind of went back and forth on what exactly their game is about, and discussed it. And I guess now this issue has been resolved. One would guess that the online Discord played a big factor in this, and probably folks at Renegade Games said, "Hey, wait a minute." There have been a number of cases like this over time, but I hope this does serve as a cautionary tale for our industry, and Shawn and I are both really glad that this has been resolved. So, good news, and we'll see what comes of this in the long run. Hopefully, it helps other companies. Let's get back to Shawn being able to actually move around.
We also have seen that EN World has put up a 2023 tabletop role-playing game freelance writer and editor pay survey. And they followed that up very recently, within the last few minutes, I think, with a survey about artists and layout as well. So this survey is available on EN World, seeking to find typical freelance pay rates for writing and editing RPG products. You can take it multiple times for each freelance job that you've had, assuming that you work in the industry. It focuses on just this year to reflect current rates because it's done a similar thing in the past. Uh, and this one does not gather industry names. Do you want to talk about the other surveys
Yeah.
that have been out there?
Yeah, we reported how Jess Markham had done a survey, and this is no slight against Jess, but just I had hoped because that one did actually gather company names. I thought that was sort of the point to say, hey, here are the companies doing the best and doing the worst, which is actually something Ian World covered in a link that we have in our show notes. Ian World actually talked about it. It surveyed companies and said, what do you the companies pay people? And it was really interesting to see some of those rates come out really, really low, and that was way back in
Mhm.
whenever it was, but many years ago, 2015 or something, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I thought Jess Markham was going to sort of update that to be, hey, Kobold Press is doing this, Paizo is doing this, Wizards doing that. That would have been really interesting to see. But they decided to keep that information quiet and just shared sort of that freelance pay has been increasing, which I think we kind of knew. The numbers are interesting, but it doesn't really kind of blow things off. So I'm a little sad that this one also is. It's just telling us about the rates that people are getting now. That's good. I
Mhm.
think it all is good because it brings attention to the issue. But in sometimes I do think that it is good to hold companies a little bit accountable when they have a track record for poor pay or not paying you on time or
Mhm.
anything like that. And this came up over the weekend too with Cryptozoic and a number of artists saying that one artist started it by saying like, I don't know what to do. Cryptozoic isn't answering my mails. They're not paying me for the art I've done, and then began all these replies of
Mhm.
other artists saying that they also are not getting paid by Cryptozoic, right? So there are times when we do need to apply a little
Yeah.
pressure in the industry and remind everybody that, hey, you've got to be on top of these things or you will, draw some fire and should draw fire.
Yep. So that's our news. I wanted to mention one thing that I was going to mention last week, but didn't get a chance to. And that is, I want to thank everyone who's been supporting the Ghostfire Gaming Kickstarter, the Ethereal Expanse. It's came out about 5 days ago. We launched. We're approaching 150,000 in just a few days. This book draws up on the fables that we've done for the Ethereal Expanse and for Agents of the Empire, looking at a setting with swashbuckling and super spy adventures for D&D 5th edition. The book has new subclasses, new monsters, new magic, and a big part of it is naval combat because
Mm.
the ethereal expanse is like the sea. So you can sail ships up on it and you can fight pirates or each other as you go. So that Kickstarter is called the Ethereal Expanse setting, and you can find it on Kickstarter.
Awesome.
Thanks for support.
I backed it.
Yep.